let me introduce you to Mamie Parker. Mamie's an American biologist, conservationist, executive coach, facilitator, and inspirational speaker from Wilmot, Arkansas. She holds a PhD in limnology from the University of Wisconsin and spent 30 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She worked in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Missouri, Georgia, and Washington. She's highly regarded in her field and also just a lovely person. So I look forward to you all having a chance to get to know her. She was the first Black woman to serve as the Assistant Director of Fisheries and Habitat Conservation and the first African American to lead a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regional office when she served as the Northeast Regional Director. She has also, for her work, amazing pioneering work in partnerships and encouraging fisheries, the whole fisheries partnership project that she worked on. She received the U.S. government's highest honor for her accomplishments, the Presidential Rank Meritorious Service Award. She's currently an executive coach, leadership person. She's on the board of the National Wildlife Federation and the Nature Conservancy, the incoming chair of the Student Conservation Association, where she is leading efforts to build partnerships and encourage safe spaces for people of color. With that, Mamie, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Normally, if I were not in this virtual setting, I would say that we would do what we do in my culture. I'll call and ask you to respond, but I'm not able to do that right now. So if you would, just say hello to me in the chat room, just so I know that you're there. After all, I feel good about myself in your presence. So we asked you to make me feel good and be my best in your presence. I want to thank Lisa for that wonderful introduction and also for the patience that she's had over the years and her folks in getting me here to speak to you all at this conference. In fact, I was scheduled to be here last year in January and got stuck in Chicago and was not able to make it. So it's such a joy and privilege to be here to talk to you all today. I am in the presence of greatness as I think about this network and all the outstanding work you've done, whether you have restored wetlands, whether you've been a lobbyist, whether or not you have created partnerships throughout the United States in some form in your past or in your present. You are grounded and growing, and that in itself makes me smile and my heart smile. I bring you greetings from Northern Virginia near the Washington, D.C. area, and it is here that I honor and acknowledge and celebrate the tribal grounds where I live. I happen to live near America's first river, the Potomac River, where Pocahontas and her native roam this area. Pocahontas and her neighbors roam these, and her native ancestors roam this area. I am so excited about this opportunity to honor those grounds, and we should always do that. I try always to do that. And I'm also honored to think about my own great-great-great-grandmother, Anne Rollins. Anne Rollins was a slave here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and over the years, she spent 30-some years as a slave and 30-some years as a free woman. And as a free woman, she ended up in Arkansas, which is a part of my heritage. And so it is here that I say thank you, and I'm so excited to be here to speak. When I think about your organization, and it's all about networking. It's all about the professionals that are there, the students, the volunteers, all of the stewardship practitioners that are there making a difference. I think about them being like my grandmother, Anne Rollins, and think about resilient and how resilient you are as you address technology advancement, as you look at analytical techniques to do your job in protecting and enhancing and restoring ecosystems in the area. As I think about the diverse perspectives that you have, and I've read about you and I heard a lot about you from Lisa and others, and it's just a wonderful way to see and hear the work that you all are doing. We have new people that are part of this network as well as seasoned individuals that have been there over time. You've been building bridges. You've been getting to know each other better. But more importantly, what you've been doing, you've used your passion. You've used your inspiration, and you used all of your excellence to get things done. And so today I'd like to talk to you about passion, inspiration, and excellence. And of course, this is very important as we think about climate change and where we are now. We know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get us where we need to be. We need to build strong ties. Coalitions are so important. We have to use our power and understand the purpose of our power. And so as we deal with climate change, we have to look and see what we can do now. Of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, hopefully on the other side of it, no longer in the middle. But how can we use our passion, our inspiration, and our excellence to address some of the challenges associated with that pandemic? And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not talk about 2020 being the year where justice was certainly in our minds and in our hearts. And in order for us to really work well and think about our networks and think about your mission and what you do, we have to think about how environmental justice and other form of justice, social justice, is important to us here in this country, and how important it is to advance our efforts and increase our understanding of the values of people that don't always look like us and act like us, but can be great partners in this whole way in which we are moving about. Passion, inspiration, and excellence is so important. So usually when I stand before you and speak, people always say, where did she come from? And so I have to tell you a little story, if it's okay. Some of you, please, it's a personal story, but it's my story, and I was asked to share it. People say, how did you get involved in conservation? Well, this lady, Cora Parker, my mother, was an avid angler. And in the late 1950s, she had already had 5 boys and 5 girls, and she was about to have her 11th child. And that was going to be me. And my mother had been divorced for several years and fell in love with a man that was married. And so it was from that union that she was about to have this 11th child. And one of the things that she certainly thought would be valuable was to make sure that I was a proud member of the family. And so one of the ways in which she did that was always made us feel proud, was to tell us that we were a piece of work and that we were a part of the Parker Rollins family and how important that was. But another way she did that was to take us out and take me out with her, being an avid angler, a great gardener, as well as, in my mind, a good botanist with an 8th grade education in the rural South, in the Mississippi Delta, one of the poorest areas in this region. But it was here that she introduced me to the outdoors. And I was born right here in this area, as I said, near Bayou Bartholomew in southern Arkansas. And of course, cotton was very popular in this part of the country. Right now, it's amazing because they have a lot of easements now in this part of the country where they're converting many of the rural agricultural lands to conservation lands. And I think that's really great. And I'm real happy about the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. And they make sure things like that happen. Paving the way is what she did when she helped me get outdoors. And I always show this picture because, as you can imagine, having 11 children and the last one, that was me, that was a lot of hand-me-downs. And so hand-me-down clothes were a part of my wardrobe, but also my mother gave me a lot and hand-me-down, as well as my brothers and sisters, a lot of great knowledge. Overflow Creek National Wildlife Refuge. I had a chance to fish right here, Bayou Bartholomew, Overflow Creek National Wildlife Refuge, not far from my home, Bayou Bartholomew, the longest bayou in the world. It was here that I had a chance to fish, but also here where where my mother taught me a lot of life lessons. And I remember one in particular was when one day I was out and was excited because I had watched Flip Wilson on TV, and that was a comedy show that he had. And during that show, he talked about Geraldine, and Geraldine spoke, and she said, "What you see is what you get." And I was out there on the banks of Bayou Bartholomew and frustrated because it was more difficult for me to catch bass and bluegill fish out here than my mother. And I always wondered why. And she said, Mamie, she said, here's a life lesson. What you see is what you get. You have to visualize seeing yourself with the fish at the end of that line that you caught because you saw it, you visualized it, and you could actually see it. When we think about passion, inspiration, and excellence in terms of networking in the midst of COVID, in the midst of climate change, in the midst of what we're going through in our country as we're building stronger advocates for justice in this country, we have to realize it. We have to see it, to believe it, to achieve it. And we think that that's one of the things. My mother also taught me about fear. And it's amazing because while this looks like a wonderful place to fish, we often had lots of snakes here. And a lot of my brothers and sisters were afraid of the snakes. And my mother would always say that fear can really paralyze you. And don't let fear stop you from doing what you really, really want to do. You have to trust and believe that you can do that. And she said fear was false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. Write that in the chat box as you think about it. False evidence appearing real. It will keep us from trusting our own judgments. It will keep us from moving ahead. And in some cases, as Dr. Steve Covey would say, it will keep us from becoming that individual that's when we talk about everyday greatness. I got to the 9th grade, and here's where the inspiration came. Talked earlier about the passion that my mother had for the outdoors and made sure that I got it and passed it on to me. But it was the inspiration that I got from my high school teacher, 9th grade, that introduced me to the song, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's song said, "Mercy, mercy me." And it said, "Things are not like they used to be." It said, "What happened to our blue skies?" And this was in the 70s now. And he said, "Radiation in our air." And then he said, "Fish full of mercury." And in the voice of Arnold, from the different strokes, I asked myself and I asked him, "What are you talking about, Willis? Fish with mercury?" Fish were so important because they were a large portion of the protein in our diet. And so for me to think that over the years that my ancestors, but also my mother and my family had been eating fish full of mercury and what the impacts that could be was a call to action. And that's the inspiration that I hope that you leave this conference with when you think about ways in which you can enhance your networking, in ways in which you can really, really leverage your resources to your fullest maximal capacity. And so he introduced me to the song, and then he challenged me to do something about it. And this song became a song that I listen to every day of my life before I get up and get out. This song motivates me to move ahead. And then after I was ready to go to college, not sure what I wanted to be or do, it was amazing because this story is interesting. At the university, I was asked if I was interested in being a biologist, majoring in biology, but also I was standing in line to get ready to declare my major and wasn't for sure if it would be biology or political science. And I happened to choose biology. And I'll be honest, it was because I had a crush on that biology teacher, and I wanted to let him know that I wanted to be like him one day. And I wanted to be his baby daddy. I wanted him to be my baby daddy. And so I did decide to be a biologist. However, I was very fortunate because a lot of the work that I got to do later on in life involved me being a biologist, but working really closely with government. So combining those two. So it was time for me to decide. I had this one recruiter that came to my school in Arkansas, and he was like a sleazy used car salesperson, not like one that you probably know or that most of them that we know. But he sold me on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and led me to believe that the job that I would have was going to be in Arkansas. And so I was ready to do my internship or summer program in Arkansas. And I got the paperwork and found out the job was in Wisconsin. And I had to, again, think about my mother and what she said about fear and whether or not this was going to be something that I was willing to do. And at first I said no. In fact, I called him up and I said, no, I just think I'll just stay here and not do this. And he was very adamant about what I could do, loving the outdoors and the passion that I have for this kind of work. And so he inspired me, which I'm hoping that you all will inspire and continue to inspire many of the students that are there at the conference as well. I read about them in Calvin University and their urban garden program. Again, understanding how important internships are, helping them pave the way, helping them to align those internships with their true passion itself. And so he told me, he said, let me see what I can do. He called me up 3 days later like a sleazy used car salesperson, and he said, we're going to throw in something free for you. And I discovered later that they were free. I went on to Wisconsin, and what I got was free for sure. He said, we're going to throw in some free clothes. And that at the time was very enticing to me. But I discovered later the free clothes were uniforms, and everybody got those free clothes. But by then I had overcame those fears and moved to Wisconsin. But I had all intentions of always going back south. And so I finished my internship, went back to Arkansas, real excited about staying there. However, that was not in the making. I had to overcome some more fears and frustrations and move back to my next position, which was my first real position at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so it was here in Green Bay that I had a chance to work in the Great Lakes and the big rivers, but mostly the Great Lakes and all its tributaries. It was here that I learned to do what many of you all are doing now, and inspired by people working on invasive species, inspired by individuals that were doing work that you're now doing related to your openings, doing some great work on contaminants in the Great Lakes and working with lake trout, and just a wonderful experience there. But I had all intentions of going south. My next job was in Madison, Wisconsin. And sometimes in life, we have big goals. When we're networking and when we're doing work for the ecosystems, we have big goals, but we have to take small steps. As many of you may know, Green Bay is about 121 miles south. Madison is about 121 miles south of Green Bay. And so we have to take small steps to get to what we want to. And it was here in Madison that I had a wonderful opportunity to do some great work, not only in the fisheries program, but also in the contaminants program as well in the Great Lakes. My next move was to Columbia, Missouri, and again, working on the big rivers, which was a great opportunity to work on not only on the rivers, but many other wetlands there. And it was here that I had a chance to work in the Partners for Fish and Wildlife in the Boot Heel of Missouri. And as I tell this story and think about life, I think about the moves and how important it was to do some of the things that I did. I also have to tell you, as you can imagine, being Black and a woman in America, things were not always easy. Yes, I experienced microaggression, isolation. Yes, I was called the N-word. Yes, I've gone out to my car and written on the windshield with white polish was the word, the N-word. And it wasn't always easy. But I tell you, again, remember the words of my mother, that you're going to get scars, but scars are there to show how strong you are. And she said, continue to make positive changes and be a catalyst for others, to take the pride that you have in your people and move ahead and be strong and authentic. And so those words stuck with me, even though it wasn't always easy. I was so excited because I was moving south in Missouri. However, my next job was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it was here that I had a chance to move to and experience excellence. I talked about passion, talked about inspiration and how important those things are when we think about networking and stewardship and ecosystems and working together and trying to address some of the problems with climate change in this country, when it's important to think about water scarcity now in the Great Lakes, and when it's important for us to think about how do we work to restore wetlands? How do we work to make sure that wetlands are protected from development when we can? And this was a great opportunity. But if I think about my personal life again, here's where I met my husband at the time, and he introduced me to Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin talks about excellence when he says that it's important for us to look to see what we've done. And his quote was, "What good have I done this day?" And as you network, as you work together, building coalitions, making sure that you're looking and addressing fish diseases or wildlife diseases, or working to restore wetlands, or whatever you're doing in your networks, invasive species, of course, not only in the Great Lakes, but all over this country now, remember the importance of checking to make sure that you're doing something good each day. I want to make sure we're doing something good for people that we work with every day. And so I was here in Minneapolis for many years, almost 9 years, but wanted to go south. So my next job was in Atlanta, Georgia. Hated it. Sometimes in life we think we know what we want, and then when we get it, we realize it's not there. And that's when I deviated a little bit from excellence, still following my passion, still being inspired by others, but had a bad relationship with my boss at the time. And while I was doing great works in this part of the country, it was here that I practiced what Dr. Covey said. And Dr. Covey talks about this in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about those 4 cancers of life that will eat us apart. And those cancers of life is what I practice: criticizing, complaining, negatively competing, and comparing. It was here that I criticized my boss to anyone who would listen, because we didn't see eye to eye on many of the things. And while it was a great opportunity for us to work with states on fisheries issues, fisheries management issues, endangered species issues in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, we opened a new office of the Ecological Services at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Arkansas, doing some great things, but was certainly not in line and had different priorities. And so I complained to whomever would listen. I criticized him, I complained, negatively competed, and negatively compared. Over time, I've learned that those things don't work out very well for us in the end. And while many other people had problems with my boss, I didn't have the skill sets to try to work through those. And so as you think about which one of these you'd like to work on, because I didn't work very well on them and almost lost my career not knowing how to deal with them. And here's when I encourage us to move toward excellence in getting the training that we need to deal with difficult people, or to make sure we're not a difficult person, because we think about the stewardship and the networking. It's very, very important for us to have strong ties with our leaders or others. others. And so I decided to quit. I was about to resign when I got a call from the director's office at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to go to Washington to become the head of the chief of staff there at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is what it's called now. And so it was in Washington that it was really a great opportunity to learn about ecosystem management. And here's where we really have to think about in terms of excellence. We've been stovepiping a lot of the work that we do on ecosystems. And finally, we're getting to the point where we're looking at large landscape conservation. As it's so important when we think about climate change conservation, it's important for us to do that, but it's also important for us to think about large landscape conservation as well. And so I was able to do that as well as some of the other work. Still working on those 4 cancers of life: criticizing, complaining, negatively, competing, and comparing. This time not with my boss, but with Congress, because I worked a lot on the Hill with individuals and in the White House. I learned some skill sets, but I also understood that, sometimes I'll get it right and other times I won't. But the songwriter said something that meant so much to me and helped me through this when he said, "We fall down, but we get up. We fall down, but we get up. Winners are losers that fall down, but get back up again and again and again." Criticize, complaining, negatively competing, and comparing. Which of those do you think you need to work on to be great volunteers in your network, in your ecosystems, in the work that you're doing as volunteers? Write it in the chat box. Let me see what you're saying right now. The key is to understand that sometimes we have to raise our hands and say, "I surrender all. I surrender all." Control was one of my biggest challenges. And as I look at some of the work that we do in collaborative leadership and adaptive management, it's all about releasing that control and understanding that we don't have to necessarily be in it. And so it shouldn't be a stopper. I learned a lot about egos as I worked in the Washington office as well. While we were doing a lot of great work migratory birds, doing international work and the trilateral agreements that we had with Canada, the US, and Mexico, doing outstanding work again on fish passage in the Great Lakes and other parts of the country as well in the New England area. Still realizing that we have to work together. And sometimes egos, I have to remember the words of my mother, egos edging goodness out. And so I worked in that job for a number of years before moving on to Massachusetts, where I was fortunate to work with some great biologists there that were bold, they were strong, and they were always starting new projects. And they helped a lot with the ego. And in fact, the song Frozen from the movie, it says Frozen, it's all about let it go, let it go, let it go. And over time, I've learned some of those skills and sets, and I hope that you will too, because those were very important. Under the new leadership at the time, and that's what happened in this job, leadership changed, and I realized that it was time for me to change as well. And so it was here that I left Massachusetts and moved back to the Washington, D.C. area to become head of fisheries in this country. Under new leadership, things we learn in ecosystems and networking and building bridges and passion, inspiration, and excellence, it's all about being problem solving. It's all about being open to new ideas. It's all about not taking it personal, and it's all about working hard. And with the President of the United States, of course, had a great interest in invasive species as it relates to the carp, the Asian carp, making sure it didn't get to the Great Lakes. And that was one of my responsibilities to work on that. Building coalitions, the National Fish Habitat Action Plan and Partnership, now a plan and partnership that's been around for many years now. And I have to say that it was such a pleasure working with folks in Fish and Wildlife Service, leading the effort, the federal effort in getting that partnership established. And I mentioned earlier fish passage removals, working on invasive species, large landscape conservation, and of course out west dealing with all the fire issues as well. Then it was time for me to think about what was first in my life. It was here that I realized that my family was not getting the attention that they deserved. And I had to tell you that I learned it the hard way. And so while we're doing work, while we're building partnerships, while we are networking and getting work done on ecosystems with passion, with inspiration, and in excellence, we have to think about, while there's a lot of work to be done, and I was certainly aware of that, I was not taking care of putting first things first, my family. And it was one day that I got a call from my husband, and basically he said he wanted a divorce because he felt like I was spending too much time taking care of the earth and not enough time taking care of home and my family. And so it was here I had to make some decisions, and they were very hard. I didn't want a divorce. I tell you now, here's a time for you to fight for what you believe in. And if you strongly believe in it, things will happen. And especially if you use and put first things first. And so it was here that I had to do that, was learn to balance my life a little bit better and still work on things that I thought were important. After spending as many years as I had, and I know how important these things are to you. Our planet is rapidly changing. It's under fire. It needed people, in my mind, like me. It suffered from water wars that I talked about early, water scarcity. And now we look at sea level rise on the East Coast, rising seas. We also know that in our frontline communities and our marginalized constituencies are suffering. People, Black and brown people, are suffering. And so I knew that there was still work for me to do. And I realized that not only could I play a part in it, but I didn't have to do it all. And so I learned to put first things first. My marriage became stronger. 2 years we worked on traveling together and doing a lot of great things and being merchants of hope, like many of you are out there. It was here that I understood the importance of making a difference. But it was also here that I knew that it was time for me to think about leaving the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and retiring. And it was because I got a call again from my husband, and this time he was calling and he said he was leaving. And I was like Gloria Gaynor in her song, go out the door, don't turn around now because you're not welcome anymore. I will survive. But it was happening because he was dying. At the age of 50, he was suffering from stomach cancer and was about to pass away. He lived for 4 months, but it was in his dying that I learned all about partnerships. I learned all about networking. I learned all about the importance of making the connections and making strong ties. Because he asked as his last wishes to have as many people as possible around us to make every day feel like Christmas. And we had people, 38 of them, in fact, from all over the country to come in and stay with us and help me take care of him as he was about to pass away. And it was in his passing that I also, again, brought back all those great things that my mother had taught me. And it was one in particular that stuck with me. And it was the song that he told me when I was down and out, I should sing it because I remember singing it for with my mother when she told me to do the same thing. And if I were here with you in the audience, I'd sing it to you. It's called Roll, Roll, Roll Your Boat Gently Down the Stream. So now turn your voices up loud as you can and sing along with me. Roll, roll, roll your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Dr. Steve Covey talks about that song, and also Wayne Dyer also speaks about roll, roll, roll your boat. It says roll, 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 don't stop. And so as you move ahead, whether you're a student, a volunteer, a practitioner, a professional, roll, roll, roll. Keep rowing. Stay in the game. We need you there. And then it says, roll, roll, roll your boat. Sometimes our problem is that we're too busy trying to row other people's boat. Roll, roll, roll your boat. And then it's gently, gently down the stream. And that means keep moving. Madagascar, one of my favorite movies. I like to move it, keep moving. And then it says, life is but a dream. And here's where I had to dream of a world without someone that I cared deeply about. But it was 12 years ago that that happened. And also on his dying bed, I was able to say what I'd said on my mother's dying bed, a poem that we had often said together. And the poem was eventually made into a song. And it's all about, too, in my mind, passion. It's about inspiration. It's about excellence as we talk about networking in times of COVID, where we have to restart. And in many cases, we have to recover and we have to renew. We're not going to have things to look like they looked before. We're not going to have people feeling the way that they have before as you think about the work that you're doing in conservation. It's not going to be the same. The poem says, each day I live to be a day to give the best of me. I'm only one, but not alone. Our finest day is yet unknown. Each day I live to be a day to give the best of me. I'm only one, but not alone. Our finest day is yet unknown. That poem is one in which helped me to stay the course when we think about rapid climate change, when we think about what's going on with development in many of our wetlands throughout the country, when we think about the fires that we're fighting, when we think about the Great Lakes water wars, we think about the contaminants, air quality, all of those things. I'm inspired by that. That inspired me as my mother passed away on her dying bed, as well as my husband. But as I close, I'd like to tell you about one of the things that happened when after I left Fish and Wildlife Service and was reflecting on some of the great things that happened to me in that job and some of the people that inspired me. And I remember when we had 911 in September. And as you can recall, a lot of people suffered from that tragedy in New York City. And as my employees were leaving the building, I knew that it was going to be hard for them, but I wanted to be there with them. And so this is my message to you, to stay together, to look for ways to support your students, look for ways to support your colleagues, look for ways in times like this to support each other, because we had to do that. And then I found out later that there was a young man on that plane, and the message came from his family on the flight 93 that was about to come into Washington and destroy our Capitol or our White House. It was that plane that I understand one of our Fish and Wildlife Service people was on. And he said they decided they were going to take down the plane. And so they looked for all they could to use. They went from one aisle to the other one saying, what do you have that we can use that can help us take down these these hijackers? And so as I think about that, they didn't have all the resources that they needed. We don't always have those with the budgets that we have now or that we're going to have. But one thing they did, they kept their eye on the prize. And I encourage you all to do the same thing as you work hard. And what they did, from what I understand, they huddled together and they said, let's roll. And that's what I'm hoping that you all will do as you continue to network, as you continue to work to do great things for conservation. Tell yourselves and get in that huddle and inspire each other with your passion, with your inspiration and your excellence. And so as I close, I say thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you will have a wonderful, wonderful conference. And now I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Mamie! Hi! That was great.
Hi,
Thank you
Lisa.
so much.
Thank you
really.
for the honor.
Oh, it was really, I'm so glad that we went ahead and dealt with that snowstorm and tried again this year.
I'm surprised you invited me back, but I'm really, 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 really honored to have the pleasure of coming to your conference. Thank you a lot.
Oh, you're so welcome. Hey, let's do a little bit more continuing to get to know you. So let me ask you a couple questions. Denzel
Okay.
Washington or Forrest Whitaker?
Denzel or Forrest Whitaker? I would say Forrest Whitaker.
All right.
Good acting, but also professional, right tempo, seems to be a good partner. So, and looks a lot like and act a lot like my new husband.
Oh, that's great. All right, let's do a little natural world. Fishing or birding?
Fishing,
That's
and
what I thought.
watching the birds, but certainly I had a choice. I live near the America's First River, as I said, the Potomac River, and I get to go down there quite often to do that.
Yep. Freshwater or saltwater?
So because I grew up in rural Arkansas and spent a lot of time, most of my life in freshwater, it just seems like there's a lot more diversity there and opportunities to do different things. So I'd say freshwater.
That's great. Being from the Great Lakes, I do too. All that salty water in the. So Mamie, there's a bunch of questions from the chat that have been coming in. Rob will field those for us. But let's start off with, why did you are so busy doing so many things. You are doing so many speeches all over the country. Why did you decide to try this twice? Not only once. Well, I felt so bad after you were stuck in the Chicago airport for 2 days last time.
Well, Lisa, I tell you, it had a lot to do with one of your members, with Jackie. Jackie, I had the pleasure of speaking at a national nature land trust conference in Pittsburgh. And she came up to me and we shared the home state of Arkansas. And she said, I'm just going to ask you if you would be willing to speak at our conference. And I think I said yes, simply because I had just finished reading Shonda Rhimes' book about the year of yes, and that you should always say yes if you can. And so that was one of those moments when I said, yes, if I'm available, I will. I have to admit I had to go back and read more about your organization and see what you were all about. And I was very, very impressed with that. But the life lesson here is that you never know when you are going to get an opportunity and build a partnership or a coalition. And if you can do so, you need to be bold enough to ask, right? We need to just ask sometimes. It's been amazing to me, the things that I've gotten when I just build up my courage to be able to ask for it. And people actually will give it to me.
Yeah, it's like just follows right from your whole talk, right? Just go out on a limb and ask. The thing that my mom always said to me growing up was, if you don't ask, the answer's no anyway. So go ahead and ask, because if it's no, it's just going to be like you didn't ask.
Right. And especially if it's going to help you support your goals and your dreams, And I know, Lisa, you guys have some pretty big dreams and things that you're thinking about in terms of fundraising. So asking is going to be one of those things that you're going to do and need a lot of help to do, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So let's turn to the chat. So Rob, is there anything from the chat that you want to share?
Yes, Mamie, can you hear me now?
Hi, Rob. Yes, and thank you so much for helping me get on.
Oh, you are so welcome. So I have a question in the chat here. What are your thoughts on maintaining positive relationships and not criticizing, comparing, competing, and etc., and the current training on how to tackle or correct, quote-unquote, call out microaggressions, racist attitudes, whether intentional or not, etc., in our workplaces? So a big question, but really just how to maintain positive relationships and criticizing constructively while also calling out behaviors that need to be called out in the workplace.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And I think that we can do both. We should not see that as either or. And when I talk about criticizing, complaining, negatively competing, and comparing, I should have mentioned the fact that constructive criticism is appropriate. And we know when we're doing that versus when we're doing it just because. But I think we have to be careful about our tone and our delivery. I'm really concerned about a lot of us that were quiet and silent doing early in my career, and even now. I give a story about going to the White House to brief the president when I worked at Fish and Wildlife Service, and the guard there, when I walked up to the door, told me I was in the wrong line, and he was very, very rude to me. Said I should be where the visitors are because he didn't believe that I belonged there. And that kind of behavior was really hard, and it's hard to accept. And what I have learned to do is to read when I do give criticism and constructive criticism, and when I do complain, I really try hard to take out some of the emotional baggage that's there, because right away when he did that to me, it brought back memories of my growing up in Southern Arkansas when I was told that I couldn't go into the front door of a home that my mother worked in as a maid, or that I had to go in the back to get my food at a restaurant because people of color weren't allowed at the front. And so all those feelings, they will come back and they will be hard. And I know that as we as women and people of color are dealing with situations, and even geographic biases, all types of biases there, that we need to still find ways to be constructive with our criticism, but still make sure that that we bring those points out to people and ask them to tell them how you feel, not always saying you, but I felt this way when you did this to me.
And Mamie, you're doing a lot of work also about creating safe spaces for people of color in the outdoors. And so those things, those little gestures that people can make when they're people of color in the outdoors, if we have people on who are rangers or stewards or leading work days, what are the things that you can do to make somebody feel welcome? A smile and a glad to have you, go so far. But, that's big work that we all online need to do.
Yeah, those nonverbals are so important. They are so very important no matter where you are. In fact, people come to me and staff will come to me, 20 years that they worked with me before, and they would say, you made me feel welcome when I walked into a room that I was not comfortable in. I felt that way when, I talk about one of my one lady that is a mentor to me, Lynn Scarlett. She works at the Nature Conservancy now. But when I would walk in the room, she'd just look at the chair right next to me and she'd say, sit here. And it's amazing how that built my confidence, and even people like me with all of these opportunities that I've had and the exposure, the little girl or the little child in us will come out in a situation like that. And so in that room, I felt like the little third grader that had just integrated in school in my hometown in Arkansas. And, my shoulders were down and I walked in and I felt like the imposter or whatever. She said, sit here. And it's amazing how I sat up. And so, we can have a lot of control. Most of us have tunnel vision when we get to situations like that. We're only thinking about our own selves. In meetings, trying to get our notes together or trying to get our thoughts together, or feeling some sense of being fearful ourselves, and we don't think about someone else. And so, yes, you're right about that. And I'd love to see more people on National Wildlife Federation. We're doing our last roundtable on creating safe places coming up on February 2nd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
So, Mamie, is that something that people can join?
Yes, they're more than welcome to join. Our first one, we had registered over 1,800, almost 2,000 people.
Oh, that's great.
Now it's getting bigger and bigger. So we would love to have you. We've sent out invitations and have a database now of over 3,400 people, and it is available. You can do it either on my website or Facebook page at Mamie Parker, Instagram or Twitter. I think it's on all of those. But if you can't find it on my page, go to the National Wildlife Federation page.
NWF, right. Nice.
NWF,
Great.
yeah.
Good. And then Mamie, the other thing, we've got another question from the chat, but one of the other things for those students who are here right now, also know that, the kinds of things that you all bring to this event each year is just absolutely inspirational. And so you may be new in your career, and even one of our testimonials is from a person who was new in her career at the first conference that she came to, and how welcoming it made her feel to have that. And so I encourage you all here to step up, step in, reach out to each other, finish filling out your profile so that people know kind of a little bit more about you. But in the meantime, Rob?
Yes, and let me just say, Lisa, to the students, one of the things that I think is important and the secret sauce is to believe in yourself, get a coach or a mentor, and then soar. And if you just think about those three things and how powerful they are, you'll all be a lot more successful. And hopefully that's what you'll do as you look for opportunities to be interns. Again, say yes too, like I did. Say yes and move forward.
Yeah, and say yes even when you're uncomfortable.
Even when you're uncomfortable. I just listened and read the poem from the inaugural poet. She's the youngest that we've ever had, Amanda Gorman.
Oh my gosh. Right?
Chill bumps, right?
So amazing.
Yes. Well, she says there is always light if only we were brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. I thought that was so true.
Mm-hmm.
So from the chat, we have a couple people asking if you would go over the 4 C's once more and explain them. And then we also have some questions about the poem that you read in the end, if you could tell us more about that.
Sure. So the 4 C's, and they're not mine. I got them from Dr. Covey when he talks about avoiding the cancers of life. And Dr. Covey's work is old. It's older than probably some of the students that are on here. But old is not bad, right, Lisa and Rob?
Right.
It's not,
yep.
It's not
and that
always
book
bad.
is in our book sale too. So you go find it and buy it with the code Steward.
Right. Antique is all right. I like old stuff. But he says that we have to avoid the 4 cancers of life because they will eat us up, just like cancer can just destroy our cells, destroy our demeanor, destroy the person that we are. And so he says that we have to be careful about those. They are criticizing, of course, complaining, negatively competing, and negatively comparing. And of course, the criticizing, we've heard earlier about the constructive criticism. But what they've also found out in terms of complaining, I think some researchers have done this, they found out 85% of the people we're complaining to, guess what? They don't care. 15% of those that we're complaining to, whatever situation we're in, they're so happy they're not in it. So we've learned from research that a lot of complaints, and usually we're complaining and criticizing to the wrong person. So we have to be careful. 4 C's: criticizing, complaining, negatively competing, and comparing.
Thanks. And the poem?
The poem is each day I live to be a day to give the best of me. I'm only one, but not alone. Our finest day is yet unknown. That poem is all about being better, going and growing, right, Lisa? It's about, every day, and we have a chance to get it right, another day to get it right. And it's about making our best better. Yeah. And then it's about understanding that we're not alone, that we have each other. And that's what I love about your stewardship network. It's all about creating a community of individuals and reimagining that in times of COVID and renewing, restarting, and recovering from it. But understanding that you're not alone, that you have each other. And then again, it's making a profound affirmation. I do a lot of affirmations. And it said, to ourselves that, our finest day is yet unknown.
So, and one of the things for all you who've been to the conference for years and years, you know that the thing that I also say is bring your whole self. Bring your whole messy, complicated self to the table because we need you. We don't need you pretending to be somebody that you're not. be your authentic self and show up and say yes and be there. So do that today and keep reaching out to people. And we've got another one from the chat.
We got another question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Mamie. So shifting gears a little bit, some people were asking about the books that you have in your background and maybe just some additional titles, or if you could tell us about what those books mean to you.
So this one, I just got it in the mail. It's called Refuge. It's photographs from all of the over 500 National Wildlife Refuges in this country. And of course, having worked at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and even in your state of Michigan, there are some great National Wildlife Refuges, including an urban refuge near Detroit. And so this book has just come out, and a photographer, he has taken many of the great photos of not just natural resources, but also people, and he's put them all in one book. And I'm so excited about it. It's a great cocktail book that he's done, and I watch CBS Sunday Morning almost every Sunday, and I look forward to the end of that show where you actually get to see nature and what's outside. And sometimes every now and then you'll see a national park or a National Wildlife Refuge, and so we have some of those pictures in there. On the other side, for my Christmas present, my beloved gave me a copy of Barack Obama's new memoir. And so it's called The Promised Land. And I am about to continue to read. I'm just into like chapter 2 of that. So I do read both paperbacks. I mean, a lot of hardback books, but I also do a lot of books, as well as electronic books as well, and sometimes audio books too. So those books help me because I'm a big biography reader. However, I do, and you talked earlier about when we did the FaceTime. When we were on Facebook, we talked about some books. Of course, still reading E.O. Wilson's book about Half Earth and how important that is for us to be able to tackle climate change, 50-50. We need to find those areas, 50% of the Earth in 50 years, we'll be able to stop climate change. And I'm grateful that the new administration has taken this as a challenge and made it a priority to get back involved in the climate, in the Paris Accord to address some of that. So that's another one of my favorite reads right now.
And so if folks, maybe Celia or Rob can drop in the chat that Facebook Live event that we did just a couple weeks ago, kind of in advance of the conference. So that was a great conversation. Totally appreciated that. And you share some more books there. The other thing that I just want to point out, your piece about looking at images of nature. So we do an annual photography competition each year. It's amazing. Oh my gosh. In the expo hall, you will find a slideshow of those photographs. We have over 2,000 photographs from all over the world, and they're just amazing. So certainly inspirational. Some of those slides that you saw in the rolling piece was also from that photography competition. So I encourage you all to go check that out in the expo booth.
I bet it was hard for the judges, Lisa, with all those photos to really find some good ones.
Completely. And when they volunteered to be judges, it was back in the day when we got 60 photos.
You've come a long ways for sure.
Yeah. And we have another chat question.
And I just have to shout out Rachel Muley for really lifting the load on all of those photos. Our co-worker could not do that without her. So another question related to the workplace, advising on dealing with difficult bosses, and I think that could be extended to people in power. Just how do you navigate those dynamics in a way when you're aware of all of these different situations and relationships you might have with them?
Well, as I said in my speech, it's not always easy. I didn't have the skill set to really deal with difficult people. So I needed to either you get your own formal training or you find your way some informal training and reading to discover ways in which you can do that. But one of the things you have to know is your own self-awareness. And I think that's important for us to know. Why are we responding to what we're getting from difficult people? Are we feeling like we're not acknowledged? Are we frustrated because they're not aware? Are we, angry because of lack of acceptance? So once we understand what it is that's causing us the problem with that individual, then we can learn to deal with it and learn to react to it and not own their problem. And I think sometimes that's what we do. We own their problem. As a success coach, as you can imagine, I have to talk people off ledges all of the time. In fact, yesterday morning, early morning, I had one of my clients call in and she's like, I'm about to quit. And, we went through the whole thing and I had to explain to her, she's fairly young. And I told her life can be hard, but life is long too. And that's a quote that I also think is important for us to remember. So number one, every day can be different, in every situation. At some point in time, you have to, know when it's time to leave. I listen to a lot of country and Western music too, and I still like Kenny Rogers songs about know when to hold them and when to fold them, and know when to walk away. So at some point, if you tried everything that you know to try, then perhaps it is time to move on if you can. If you can't, you have to get those skill sets that you need that will help you. And those are all individual ones. For me, I had to know my crazy. And so I always ask people, know you're crazy, whatever it is, know it and know what it makes you tick. And then you have to really, as I said earlier about visualizing yourself in a different situation. I stopped my client that was about to leave government and said, let's go back to your long-term dreams. And she said, well, I want to work at the Pentagon one day. And I was like, and I want to be there with you on your first week there. And I want you to think about that. And so turning things into a positive situation when you can. And then when you can't, I live somewhere close to Colin Powell. It's another book that I read. Have read his bio. And Colin Powell says something I think was so important. He said, get mad and get over it. And so, because in order to have everyday greatness, you can't stay in that place. You have to move on and let it go. And again, giving that feedback when you can, looking for an ally. Sometimes there are things that you can't do by yourself, but if you find somebody else that can help you get to that. And then my mother always said, a bend in the road is not the end of the road. So keep working hard at it. I've had of course, I've worked for 5 different directors of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and each of them were political appointees. And they all had their own priorities. And, initially I would say, well, I'm going to come in, they're going to get here, and I'm going to share my priorities with them and see how I can get them to take upon my priorities. And I still think that's important, to share what you think is important. But I also learned that really what was successful was to be a problem solver, be open to new ideas. A lot of times don't take it personal and continue to work hard in spite of situations like that.
So Mamie, we have unfortunately come to the end of our time together. The other thing that I wanted to say is I also, in terms of that, your story about your mother and fishing, visualize it. Visualize that fish on the end of the line. And so that's, I think, another part of what you're saying. I want to thank you so much for coming to us twice, once making it. Like this is also the story of perseverance that you're sharing is this whole thing. Perseverance and being here digitally with all of you all. I want to thank you all. So what we're going to do now is we're going to end this session.